I welcome you all for the next session, which is happening today. I'll not take much of the time and straight away introduce the speaker for this session. And the speaker for this session is none other than my friend, founder of TEER Foundation, who is my fellow director as well, Mr. Milind Thatte. Welcome, Milind. And
Thank you.
Milind's actually introduction is quite vast. He has enormous experience, and as Shimona gave elaborations and details about the battles in the court. So the battle which is fought on the ground, I think we have leader of that battle for the tribal rights before us. And so Milind's education is actually he did his MA in mass communication from Symbiosis International University. And thereafter, actually, he worked as a script writer for documentary films with Indian Magic Eye Private Limited. So, Indian Magic Eye is a name if those who are from Maharashtra can actually relate it for the creative work. Then he did a lot of other communication consulting activities. However, the reason for which he is known is actually Vayam movement. He is the organizer for the Vayam. The motto of the Vayam is basically empowering tribal youth leaders in law-based advocacy. So that is a very important point. And developing, planning, community mobilization, decentralized water and forest governance, building network of local trainers for empowering village level democratic institutions. So that is actually the motto of Vayam. And then obviously he is the founder director of TEER Foundation. So if you could just Google with Milind Thatte Vayam, there are enormous resources, videos, lectures which are available of Milindji, and I'm sure you would gain a lot of insights about Milind. So without delaying and taking much of his time, I'll pass on the baton to Milind. Milind, over to you.
Thank you, Ashish, for a flattering introduction. Uh, Thank you, everyone around. I hope the slide is visible to everyone.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Uh, so, I will be speaking about Panchayat Raj in scheduled areas. Panchayat Raj is a synonym for decentralized and local governance, and how this has extended to scheduled areas. So I used the term scheduled areas. So let's go back a little in history to understand what is scheduled areas. Because usually people would call this tribal areas, but these are defined in our constitution as scheduled areas. Uh, Long time back during the British times, there were a lot of struggles, rather wars fought by tribal communities almost across our country to protect their forests and lands. Incidentally, today is the day of martyrdom of Sidho and Kanu, the leaders of Santhal Hul or Santhal War of Independence that was fought in 1855. So most all of us know 1857 as the first War of Independence, but our history has constantly neglected tribal heroes and Adivasi revolutionaries who fought for their rights and access over land and forest for a long time. So, like Sidhu Kanu, Birsa Munda is known a lot more to everyone across the country. But there is a huge plethora of tribal freedom fighters that are quite unknown to the urban world. Anyway, so when these people were fighting, British understood that it is very difficult to win over these people, and British decided to kind of walk away from these areas or have indirect control. Now we are sitting in Mumbai, and close to us is the district, Dang district of Gujarat, and old generation people must be knowing that when Maharashtra and Gujarat were separated as states, Dang was exchanged against Mumbai. Very few of us would be knowing that five tribal kings of Dang defeated British army, and then British had to sign a pact with them not to intervene in Dangs. But British were very clever people, so they declared some of these areas as partially excluded areas. They should have said partially surrendered areas or something like that, because British had to surrender before tribal warriors. But these were called partially excluded areas, and areas in the northeast, the Arunachal, Nagaland, Mizoram, Meghalaya, Tripura, these areas were declared as excluded or fully excluded areas. When our constitution was drafted, there was a separate subcommittee formed in chairmanship of A.V. Thakkar, popularly known as Thakkar Bappa, an astute Gandhian and known as a servant of tribal communities. Thakkar Bappa led this committee, and they decided to have uh, fifth and sixth schedule of the constitution describing certain special governance mechanisms for these areas. So here I will be speaking about the fifth schedule, which is applicable to 10 states in our country. So fifth schedule of constitution is Article 244(1). And these are the most important points. The first one is governor of a state is held responsible for good governance and peace in tribal or scheduled areas. So governor is expected to file a report of uh, scheduled areas to the president every year. The other thing, as Shomonaji mentioned in her speech, is every state in uh, fifth schedule is supposed to have a tribes advisory council. This tribes advisory council is supposed to give advice to the governor, which means head of the state, on policies regarding the scheduled areas and tribal populations. This is now I would like to, because I am not coming back to Tribes Advisory Council later. Tribes Advisory Council is formed in many of these states, but how the government has ridiculed this is, in most states the chief minister is the chairman of Tribes Advisory Council. Incidentally, I am a member of Tribes Advisory Council of Maharashtra State, nominated by the governor, and I have seen that the last government convened the meeting of Tribes Advisory Council only twice in 5 years. Now, the current state government in Maharashtra hasn't called a meeting yet. So, this council, although it's a very powerful and important institution mentioned in the constitution, it is rarely used, or rather rarely allowed to function. The most important thing in fifth schedule is that it categorically mentions that the law shall be applicable to scheduled areas. Any passed by parliament or by state legislature shall be applicable to scheduled areas as per modifications by the governor. Governor can issue notification that a certain law or some part of the law shall not apply to scheduled areas or shall apply with modifications. So this is really important, but very few governors have used this power. And why governor? Because all of us can understand this pretty easily, that the governor is above state level politics. I mean, that is what is expected, because he is head of the state. He is not head of the executive. So the governor is supposed to be above state politics, and in state politics where the tribes are always in minority, somebody higher, somebody who is away or above the state politics, should take care of the tribal interests. And that's why the governor is given this power. But very few governors have used this. Vidyasagar Rao in Maharashtra and the current governor of Maharashtra, Bhagat Singh Koshari, both have used these powers, and they have amended many laws for scheduled areas. There are many examples. I cannot dwell on that right now, but it has been really important. This article also mentions three important things that have always been the source of exploitation of tribal people all across the country. One is about transfer of land. Second is about allotment of land between scheduled tribes, and the third one is money lending. You can understand uh, how general and how common this must have been of cheating the tribal people by taking away their land or through money lending practices. One example I would quote from Raigad district, which is close to Mumbai, and this is also documented in many books, that there was a practice of having lagin gadi, and this was usually with Katkari tribe, who is a landless tribe in Raigad district, and the landed communities would hire these people as lagin gadis. And what does that lagin gadi means? That if a Katkari man is getting married, then his landlord would give him some small loan, 50 rupees, 100 rupees, something like that. And to repay that loan, this will work for his entire life without pay. And there were examples of people working for 3 generations without pay for paying back one small loan of 11 rupees or 13 rupees. So money lending is also to be controlled by the governor so that the state and the local politics does not exploit the tribal. There have been people arguing on the side of fifth schedule and against fifth schedule, and some have called this separate constitution within constitution. But there are these two sub sections in this article which mention that the president may declare or modify or reduce scheduled area in any state, and the parliament has the right to amend this schedule. So this is not like something uh, taking the tribes away from the country or giving them powers which are like extra constitutional or separate. This is very much very integral to our constitution. Now this is to bring before you a picture of what size of population and states we are speaking of. These are the 10 states where we have fifth schedule areas. As students of political science, all of you know very well about 73rd Amendment or the Panchayat Raj Act. This amendment categorically mentions in Article 243M that this part shall not apply to certain areas, which includes fifth schedule areas. And this also mentions that the legislature of a state and the parliament have to pass a law to extend the provisions of this, that is, extend the provisions of Panchayat Raj to tribal areas and scheduled areas in fifth and sixth scheduled areas. So that is how this act called PESA, Panchayat's Extension to Scheduled Areas, was passed in 1996 by our parliament. Now, the basic difference that this act brought was it added a fourth layer of local governance. The top three are already known to all of us, which are common to non-tribal areas. Zilla Parishad, the names I've written here are from the Hindi belt: Zilla Panchayat, Tahsil Panchayat, Gram Panchayat. All levels have one elected head and one from the bureaucracy. But you see the bottom layer, the fourth layer is Gramsabha, which was very rightly mentioned by my previous speaker also. Gram Sabha is the only place where you can have direct democracy. All the other places are representative democracy. And as students of political science, you all know that direct democracy is where the voters are directly members. So Gram Sabha, once you are 18 years old and registered in the electoral roll, you become a lifetime member of Gram Sabha. What difference does this make, this Gram Sabha? Now, if you see the left-hand side diagram, in most of the tribal areas, there are very small hamlets or pada or palli or tanda or pod as they are called in various parts of the country. But these are very small habitations. So when a state forms a Gram Panchayat, it has to club many villages together. And invariably, you will find group Gram Panchayats in all tribal areas. So what PESA actually seeks to do is bring governance down one level from the group Gram Panchayat to the hamlet or habitation level. And why is this habitation or pada or falya is important? Is because it is, as in now the sociologists know this term of natural village. Why natural village? Because this village is not established by a government decree. It's not a colony or a society. It's a natural village because it has grown up like any biotic being, like a tree. That there were some families which settled in that place, say 5, 6 generations back. Gradually, their children, their kin, and the village grew into a big village. So the bonds between the people, the community is not tied by any loose bonds. These are generation old bonds and they have been together through happiness and woes. They have shared everything. Sukh dukh mein saath hi rahe. The other thing is they have tradition of commons. They have certain common resources which they have used by their customary laws. The traditional resources, common resources are like the forest and rivers, mountains. There were laws, of course, there were laws, but these laws seldom reached in the minds of the tribal people. What kept them and their forest alive was their own traditional laws or customary laws. So there were these customs of helping each other and governing, or rather, uh, respectfully maintaining the community natural resources. When Gram Sabha, this institution was so far, it used to be in the Gram Panchayat office, but the Gram Sabha has moved out to the smallest habitation because of PESA. Of course, this depends on what type of rules each state has. Now, I am speaking by giving reference of Maharashtra state PESA rules. Maharashtra state PESA rules recognized these small hamlets as the seat of Gram Sabha. When Gram Sabha moved to this smallest village, what happened naturally was there was increased participation because people could sit in their comfort zones. A big tree in the village or some government school in that village, that became the hall for the Gram Sabha. And it was there was tremendous comfort in conducting it because the Gram Panchayat office, the four walls of Gram Panchayat office speak the bureaucratic state language. But when a Gram Sabha moves to a small hamlet, the Gram Sabha starts speaking the local language. And if you see through any tribe and go to a traditional assembly of a tribal village, where people naturally get together for, say, for a marriage or for a funeral or for annual worship of Vagdev or any such god from the forest, there the people come together, or when there is a meeting for conflict resolution. If there is a dispute between two farmers, or if there is a family fight, then the village sits together to solve that dispute. When such assembly sits together, women have an equal voice as men. There is no gender disparity. There are no barriers on women attending that meeting or speaking in that meeting. So when Gram Sabha moves to a small tribal village, it is naturally a Gram Sabha with gender parity. Here, because of now, you see this image, which is Vangadpada village in Jawhar Taluka of Palghar district. This is their Gram Sabha with uh, 35% quorum. So this is a small population. They can really have deliberation. They can really have charcha. They can decide their own agenda. The Gram Sabha Adhyaksh is one of them. Now the Maharashtra rules have a very good provision that the Sarpanch, although the Sarpanch also belongs to the scheduled tribes in scheduled areas, the Sarpanch is disqualified from being the president of a Gram Sabha. Why? I will elaborate a little later. But the discussion here will go on in local language. People are sitting very comfortably and close to each other. There is no, even in sitting arrangements, you can see that there is no inequality. The beauty of PESA, as I have seen in the field while as an activist trying to implement PESA in many villages, is that it brings a beautiful synthesis of traditional strength of tribal community and a contemporary constitutional legal system. Here, now this is important that all government driven Gram Sabhas have an agenda fixed in advance. But the tradition is bringing up agenda during the assembly. The Maharashtra rules and Gujarat rules are good on these terms that they give, sorry, not Gujarat, Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh rules are good because they give scope for this. Now I'm taking you to the next level where we are trying to understand what is the picture, what is the status in all these 10 states of implementing PESA. What I spoke so far is the theory, the idea behind PESA. Now here, if you look at all states, only Maharashtra has PESA rules since 2014, which has an elaborate process of declaring a tribal habitation as a Gram Sabha. It's a very simple process. 50%, at least 50% of voters in a tribal pada have to write a resolution and attach a hand-drawn map of boundaries, their traditional boundaries of the village, and submit it to the SDO, the subdivisional officer. And the rules amazingly give a time limit on the government. Now, the rules say that if within 90 days the SDO doesn't take a decision or doesn't take action, then in next 45 days the collector has to take an action. If he too fails in taking an action, then that village is deemed approved. Now, this provision was used by people, and because of this, Maharashtra is having some Gram Sabhas in the hamlets. Madhya Pradesh also has a similar provisions, but it has never been used because people, nobody worked on its awareness. Or Madhya Pradesh has constitution of Gram Sabha since 1998. But even the Panchayat Raj secretary, now he's retired, of Madhya Pradesh state, told me that we have never seen a rise in number of villages, which means they never really implemented this. Now, I come across questions from officers in government and sometimes some friends in different political parties as to what will happen to Gram Panchayat when a Gram Sabha becomes powerful. So I bring their attention to this. As in political science, all of us know this jargon of having three different pillars of democracy: legislature, executive, judiciary. And if these are not separate, then there is no system of checks and balances. And if there are no checks and balances, democracy doesn't function properly. You can imagine the Prime Minister being the Lok Sabha president. How will Lok Sabha be independent? So similarly, the Gram Sabha is the Lok Sabha of a small village, and Gram Panchayat is its executive arm. But so far, for so many years, Gram Panchayat has remained like a presidential government having all power centralized, and even Sarpanch don't like citizens asking them questions. So this is something very common to every authority in our country. This is a small point apparently, but it makes a big difference when it comes to implementation of PESA provisions. Somebody has to convene the meeting of Gram Sabha, and to convene that meeting, there has to be a notice issued of Gram Sabha. Now, Mahara rules have a good provision about this, that if the Gram Panchayat secretary is not available or is not present for a Gram Sabha, then a person elected as the Gram Sabha Adhyaksh can nominate a secretary for that meeting. So, which means that now Gram Panchayat secretary, or as he is called Gram Sevak in Maharashtra, uh, he is quite powerful at the village, in the village bureaucracy. If there are people from rural Maharashtra here, they would know that there is a hierarchy of Sahab in the government, where the Gram Sevak or Gram Panchayat secretary is called Bhau Sahib, the Taluka officer is called Rao Sahib, and his superior is called Sahib. So this Sahib government hasn't left us yet, and but at least there is a provision in Maharashtra rules where uh, somebody else can be nominated as Gram Sabha secretary. Rajasthan PESA rules has a very good provision that if in the first meeting of a Gram Sabha, the people, the voters, the members of Gram Sabha decide all the future dates for the entire year of that Gram Sabha, then no notice has to be issued, which is really good and which is very much in keeping with tribal traditions, where the traditional assemblies are on certain festival days or worship days. So this Rajasthan has a good rule about that, but I don't know if they have implemented it or it is just on the paper. This is another thing that is really important. How many times is a Gram Sabha meeting held? If you look at a Vidhan Sabha meeting, Vidhan Sabha session, It goes for weeks. And there are our MLAs sitting there, and on Doordarshan, you must have seen them at times yawning, sleeping, doing something else. If they cannot deliberate for weeks together, how can we expect villagers who are new to this system to continue for a long Gram Sabha meeting? So the best thing is to have frequent Gram Sabha meetings of short duration. And the state should keep a space for that, give a scope for that for the people to decide how many times they want their Gram Sabha to happen. So Rajasthan again has this excellent rule that there is no limit on number of Gram Sabhas and people can really convene a Gram Sabha on their demand. And Gujarat, if you see, I have given Gujarat a negative ranking because Gujarat has a very strange provision where the citizens have to give a written intimation to the Gram Panchayat requesting a Gram Sabha, and only one Gram Sabha meeting is mandatory in a year. So only one Gram Sabha, that means it has no role left. But Madhya Pradesh, Telangana, and Maharashtra all have a provision that written notice is not mandatory. The traditional way of beating drums and orally announcing throughout the village of a Gram Sabha meeting is also considered a legal notice, which is really good, which is very easy for tribal villages to follow. Now, Gram Sabha, like Lok Sabha or Vidhan Sabha, is an amorphous body, which is a huge body, and it cannot meet every day and cannot become an executive body because it is a big body of all voters in the village. But none of the state rules of Madhya Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Andhra Pradesh, they don't elaborate on any committees of Gram Sabha. Maharashtra has 9 committees of Gram Sabha. Now this reflects on the seriousness of the state. How much do they really want PESA rules to function? Jharkhand and Gujarat are on the negative side because they formulate committees, but on subjects which are not relevant to PESA. Many of you must have read about this or heard that the basic natural resources are jal, jungle, zameen. All other wealth is a conversion from these resources to something else. So whoever controls Jal Jungle Zameen has access or right to development. If people don't have a control over Jal Jungle Zameen, which means they are deprived of everything else. PESA gives rights to these three elementary resources to the Gram Sabha. But now, as I said in the beginning, PESA Act is passed by the Parliament and states are supposed to pass the rules. And the rules are required for implementing the law. So what do the rules do? I have seen that the many rules like Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Rajasthan, they don't define a minor water body. Maharashtra says that water body which has in its command area less than 100 hectares is to be called a minor water body. But there is no elaborate provision on how a Gram Sabha is supposed to govern a water body. What is important to people in a water body, not just water, but fish in that water body. Because fish and crabs make a very good and important source of nutrition for people. There are instances of villages from different parts of the country where a good perennial water body exists in a village, but the rights to fish are given to somebody else, to some cooperative society or somebody from outside. If local people have the rights to control that water as well as the fishing in that water body, they will have food for themselves and they will also have some surplus to sell. Now this is really empowering people. This is not giving doling out benefits or giving welfare schemes. This is empowering people simply by giving them access to resources that they have always nurtured and have lived upon. Now, when we come to forest resources, and the earlier session has been really enlightening on Forest Rights Act, but just to understand this scenario, why forest is so important to forest dwellers and Adivasi populations. This graph is from Census Handbook, and it shows the fuel wood dependency on fuel wood for cooking. If you see this orange graph here, it says firewood, and this is scheduled tribes households dependent on that. They are 76.4%. Now, cooking of food is such an elementary need of survival, and for that you need firewood. When we think of stakes in a forest, as there were examples in the earlier lecture, that diamond mine, coal mine, or some other huge industry would have investment and profits as the stake. But what people have at stake is their daily cooking. We also consider these. There are these wildlife lovers. I don't know how they love wildlife, but I mean, what do they exactly do? But there are wildlife lovers, and there are so-called environment. I mean, there are of course some genuine environmentalists, but there are many such environmentalists who believe that people should be taken out of forests. And what do these wildlife lovers really do for the forest? They go there on weekends and take pictures. Do they depend on the forest for survival? Is their survival bound with the forest? That's not the case. But for tribal people living in forest and in villages which are close to forest, they need the forest to survive for their own survival. So they are the primary stakeholders, and that's why PESA categorically mentions that the ownership of minor forest produce in scheduled area shall be with the Gram Sabhas. And of course, FRA has strengthened this further. Now, Himachal Pradesh and Maharashtra at least have good rules about this, giving ownership of minor forest produce to Gram Sabhas. But what we see in some other state is really strange. In Gujarat, as in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan and Andhra Pradesh, Tendu Patta and Bamboo, which are the biggest cash earning minor forest produce, are not given to the Gram Sabhas. Their PESA rules of these states categorically say that Gram Sabhas shall have the ownership of minor forest produce, but not of bamboo, not of bidi leaf, not of tendu patta. And Rajasthan rules go even further, saying that these powers shall not exist in sanctuaries, national parks, and reserved forests, and so many other areas. Which means कि आप मालिक तो है लेकिन आपके हाथ बंधे हुए हैं, which doesn't make sense. The third important thing as Jal and Jungle is Zameen. And there have been numerous case struggles, wars, revolts, satyagrahas throughout our history of tribal farmers against the land grabbing by non-tribals. The That's why the land, protecting the land of tribal farmers is extremely important. And there are rules of various states. Now, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Chhattisgarh have some good provisions on land management. Andhra Pradesh rules have a very elaborate procedure of land records, change in land records. Gujarat PESA rules say that any change in land record has to be read before the Gram Sabha before it is made final. Maharashtra rules also have similar provision that all land records should be read aloud in a Gram Sabha meeting, and without Gram Sabha approval, no land transfer can be made. But I found strange that in Odisha, in case of land acquisition by the state, the Jila Panchayat is consulted, which I find very ridiculous and against the spirit of the 2013 law of right to fair transparency in land acquisition. Because Jila Panchayat leaders or representative of people in Jila Panchayat, they are not losing land in land acquisition. The farmers are losing, and the farmers can voice their views in the Gram Sabha meeting and not in Jila Panchayat. But states have formed such ridiculous rules. In case of minor minerals, now by minor minerals we mean sand, rock, and clay, soil. All these are called minor minerals. And minor minerals are to be controlled by the Gram Sabha for two reasons. One, as I have seen in Maharashtra villages, is for constructing your own house, home would require these minor minerals. Another thing that impacts people's livelihood is if there is excessive extraction of minor minerals from a riverbed or from a quarry, it affects the entire ecology around. If there is excessive sand mining from a river, the farmlands on both banks of that river would collapse, they will break, and the farmers will lose their valuable produce from these lands. And the only place where farmers can actually assert their rights over these land and the protection of their produce is the Gram Sabha. And that's why it becomes really important whether the Gram Sabhas are really having control over minor minerals. Now, Gujarat is here ranking at the top because Gujarat PESA rules say that for all kinds of excavation in scheduled area, Gram Sabha approval, prior approval is mandatory, which is something really good. I don't know if they are implementing it, but it's good on paper. Himachal Pradesh is, I think, the only state where the rules say that the royalty on minor minerals shall be deposited in Panchayat fund, which is good because the Panchayat can earn from the extraction if it wants to and allows doing that. In Andhra Pradesh rules, it says that a person belonging to scheduled tribes or association entirely formed by scheduled tribes alone shall be given mining lease, which again is a good provision. Again, Odisha and Jharkhand are on the negative side, as I see. So this is how I could quickly run you through PESA Act, which extends Panchayat Raj to scheduled areas in these 10 states. In scheduled areas, that is, there are districts in scheduled areas, tehsils in scheduled areas, but a big number of population benefits from these provisions if they are really implemented. So here I stop my presentation.
I think it was a very informative session. I think many among the listeners and viewers of this program for today would definitely be joining us in the future events, and we will be waiting for you.